I'll make my intro short, and everybody who doesn't know me can ask lots of questions later. I've been a Bedford Audubon chapter member for 20 plus years, worked for National Audubon in the state of Connecticut, did consulting work for American Bird Conservancy and Manomet and multiple other great bird organizations. And I now presently work for BirdLife International. And my job is predominantly raising the funds for full life cycle bird conservation, which, if that's not a familiar term, it means linking everything that our friends in Canada, what you all are doing in Westchester, and depending on how far that bird travels, if it's a bobolink, linking it all the way down to the pampas of Argentina, so that we are protecting the habitat and the birds throughout their entire annual migratory cycle. So I know many of us have been working on bird conservation for so many years, it can sometimes get kind of frustrating and tiring. I was working with a couple scientists, and they handed me a grant they were writing and said, "Can you help?" And it first paragraph said, we've been studying shorebirds for the last 30 years, and in that time, the populations have decreased by 50%. And I said, you can't tell people that. That sounds like bad news. So I like giving good news, and there's a lot of it. Even though it's a crazy world we live in, there is really some good stuff happening in conservation, especially in the Americas. So that's what we're going to talk about for the next 20 or 30 odd minutes. Some of this stuff I'm going to go through quickly, because looking at some of the folks who are in this chat, you all have been at this game for a while, and those who are newer to it, like I said, ask away the questions, we'll answer, and keep talking till the owls come out. But birds link our world. More than half of them are migratory. They're spending 50% or more of their time in the Caribbean and Latin America. They connect us. I always say that's the true thread that hopefully will create global sustainability and global peace, because we share birds across all continents. And that hopefully builds a mutual trust and a mutual desire to work together. I'm going to give you a couple sad slides. Nearly a third of migratory birds have population declines, restricted ranges, meaning they're losing habitat. They have such discrete, bicknell thrushes, for instance. They only like to nest 3,000 feet or more above sea level. Adirondacks, Catskills, White Mountains, Canada. With climate change, every year they have to go higher, because the weather, which is what is the defining part of the that makes their habitat, is changing and forcing them higher. And at some point, they're going to hit the top of those mountains. Salt marsh sparrow, as climate change floods salt marshes, they're losing their habitat. They're perfectly timed for the full moon cycle to get into a salt marsh just at high tide, as as the full moon is rescinding. Nest, bring young to the point where they can avoid the next full moon high tides. And now we're seeing these terrible storms that constantly are hitting us and flooding their nests. Piping plovers, we all know, because we're all within striking distance of the Long Island Sound and Long Island, whether it's cats, foxes, once again, erratic storms that are wiping out their nests. So birds are facing some pretty dire circumstances. And most of you probably, if you get Audubon magazine or ABC magazine or Fish and Wildlife Service, you saw the report that came out a couple of years ago. Over the last 40 some years, we've lost 2.9 billion birds, with the worst being in our grassland species, then shorebirds, then the boreal forest species. And luckily for us, eastern forest birds are probably the least affected. And that's because, as many of us know, we're actually generating more forest in the east as less and less agriculture happens in our states. But for our grassland species, because of large-scale corporate agriculture, the human footprint across the land, those are the places that we're really seeing problems. And with shorebirds, because everybody likes to live along the coastline, they too are fighting us for habitat. So let's get to the good news. How do we reverse the crisis? Well, you are part of that, because as part of Audubon, you were working in a coordinated fashion at a national level. Audubon is a U.S. partner to BirdLife, and so we are working at an internationally coordinated level. And any of us who go to Croton Point to do summer or Christmas bird counts, any of us who go to other IBAs, we are already part of the system. We are using our science, which a lot of it is built on citizen science, eBird, the Christmas, the summer counts, the Project Nest Watch that Ann mentioned. That enables us to compile the data to figure out what are the most threatened species that we need to focus on to ensure that they are protected. So we start with the critically endangered, working down until we get to the species of least concern, figuring out full life cycle conservation plans. And those full life cycle conservation plans include conserving the most important sites and habitat, important bird areas, and key biodiversity areas. We're never going to reclaim all of the land that has been changed, but birds, as you all know, they land in very specific places. They love Croton Point. They love Central Park. They love Jamaica Bay. If we can work on protecting those places, we can actually create stable populations of birds. And then we look at, in places, especially in Latin America and the Caribbean and Africa and other places where are still the developing world, how do we promote ecological sustainability? How do we ensure that communities actually can have their forests, can have their grasslands, but that their children can also eat? And that's shade-grown coffee, that's shade-grown cacao, that's grassland beef that's managed in a bird-friendly manner. And by doing that, we empower the communities so they can protect their natural resources. And BirdLife is doing this in 119 countries with 121 actual partners. You see some of them on the bottom of this slide that are doing at a national level work that is then coordinated in a global fashion so that our flyways are protected and our birds are being preserved. So many of us go to places and we see that sign that says IBA, important bird area. We don't even perhaps think about it. But that is an actual scientifically devised system where we are looking at and giving those important bird areas grades based on whether it's a vital spot for a critically endangered species. In some cases, it may be the one spot. If you go to Ecuador and you go to Mindo, which is up above Quito, that is one of two sites where the black-breasted puffleg, a beautiful little hummingbird, can be found. Yes, they're probably in some of the other forests, but those are the only two places that we have actually scientifically registered that they are nesting. And so that is globally important. Jamaica Bay, the Delaware Bay area are globally significant because of the numbers of shorebirds that come in. For Delaware Bay, specifically the red knot. These are areas that all those little dots that you see that we are actually saying, if we protect those 13,000 sites that cover more than 26 million square kilometers, we can sustain bird populations. And that's why it's so important. And that is why the UN and many of the big multilateral funders look to BirdLife and in the US, Audubon, et cetera, and say, those are the places you've identified. Those are the places we will fund conservation in. And if you go down the course of the Americas, you might stop at Andros Island, which our good friends at Bahamas National Trust, Eric Carey, who just stepped down as their executive director, have managed to turn the whole mudflats along the Andros Island area into a national park to protect probably about 75% of the eastern population wintering piping plovers. In the Dominican Republic, Grupo Jaragua, working on bicknell thrush. So if you don't want to get up at 3 a.m. and hike up Whiteface in the Adirondacks to get your yearly bicknell thrush, go down in the winter to the Dominican Republic, where it's nice and sunny, and you only have to get up at 5 a.m. to hear them sing. But Grupo Jaragua is a small group, and they're doing huge work with us here in the U.S. on bicknell thrush, also on black-capped petrel, which is the species you're seeing on that slide. Really, really important work, because the island of Hispaniola, if it wasn't for them, the efforts of some of the other conservation organizations, the island would be completely deforested. They have a terrible ecological problem. And then in Panama Bay, our friends at Panama Audubon, Rosabel Miro, their executive director for many years, Panama Bay is globally significant for shorebird populations, wintering shorebirds, because basically every bird that's going to Latin America is going to stop in that Panama Bay. It's the choke point. It's even more so than Veracruz, perhaps, because it is just the smallest space, land-based, that birds pass through. And literally millions of shorebirds will be there in the winter. National Audubon has been working very closely with Panama Audubon. Panama Audubon is a partner in the BirdLife partnership, and their work is absolutely key for almost all migratory birds that will go into Latin America. And then in Latin America itself, you were just talking about 15 cerulean warblers. You have to come to Colombia and see them in their wintering locations. That's absolutely, I think, ceruleans are one of my most favorite birds. And seeing them in the highland, they're not super high in the Andes. They're usually at about, I think what it is, 9,000 feet. They can be found on the edges of some of the coffee farms, and right along with them, you'll find tons of Canada warblers. I was in Ecuador this January, and I probably saw more Canada warblers in the 2 weeks I was there than I've seen in my life. They were just everywhere. Other winter visitor to that area, scarlet tanager, red-eyed vireo, and then for the birds that don't come north, I think everybody would love to see a Andean cock of the rock, which is that leftmost crazy-looking bird. And so absolutely important that we have our partners in Ecuador, Colombia, and also Peru. And then the very southern latitude, I was saying to Anne, some people hadn't joined, up in North Salem, today was the first day the bobolinks returned. One of the longest distant migrants. That bird spent its winter in probably the pampas, the grasslands of Argentina, perhaps Uruguay or Brazil. And they fly up. Actually, they fly down. They go out all the way to the Caribbean, fly over the Dominican Republic. There are recordings during the 1800s of the sky actually turning dark. So many bobolinks were going over the island. And then they turn in, they fly back over the Amazon, come through Bolivia, and then down into Paraguay, Brazil, Uruguay, and Argentina. And we are working through BirdLife with an alliance of 500 farmers who collectively manage about 1.5 million acres of grasslands. And they have all committed to managing their farms for grassland species. So bobolink, buff-breasted sandpiper, the pampas meadowlark, an absolutely beautiful meadowlark that has an incredible red chest, a suite of seed eaters and blackbirds, the saffron-crowned blackbird. These are all the species that these farmers are protecting. And in return for what they're doing, we're working with multilateral organizations, governmental and private banks and development banks, who then are giving these farmers better prices for their beef, and also a whole system of where the entire community in which these ranchers are living receive better credit terms. And so it's a program that actually benefits the entire community through the good works and through bird conservation. And so the common denominators, we're linking birds, people, economies, and in doing so, we're creating full life cycle conservation that protects the bird, whether it's nesting in the tundra, in the boreal of Canada, in our northern landscapes right here in Westchester, and all the way that it migrates. The stopover sites right to the places that it'll spend 3 months in our winter in Latin America's summer. The red knots might be in Chile, it might be on the northern shore of Brazil or down in Argentina. Golden wing warbler that somebody had a photo of, that bird I've been working with through the work I was doing with American Bird Conservancy in Honduras, in Nicaragua, in Mexico. So we're linking all of those sites. And that's what the good news is. It's actually happening. And some really exciting news that will be coming out in places like the New York Times, et cetera, in September during the Climate Initiative conference at the UN in September, is we've gotten several of the large Latin American banks to get behind this. They are making commitments to sell green bonds, to find the funders that we can invest $100 million per site at 30 key landscape level and seascape level sites. So it won't just be like Croton Point, it would be the entire lower Hudson Valley if this area was chosen, just to give you an idea of the scope. We're targeting priority habitat for priority species. So we're starting with the most critically endangered species and saying, what are the sites all along their migratory route that are absolutely imperative to protect? And then let's go in there, let's work with these banks, get the green bonds, and then let's purchase or buy easement on those lands so that they are permanently protected. And then a good portion of the funds that we'll be receiving will actually go to training the local communities in how to protect their lands permanently, finding economic ways for them to farm, to live, that don't disturb the animals, so that it actually is fully integrated. And so where is that started? Conserva Aves is our first real big initiative. It's $17 million, and it will, in the next 3 years, protect 1.2 million acres of incredible lands from Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, into Bolivia, all high Andes, and it'll create 30 to 40 new protected areas. We have some of that money allotted, as I said, so that we can actually train communities, create local conservation groups. It's almost like creating Audubon chapters throughout that whole area. Many of these people already are doing a lot themselves. The women that you see in the middle photo are from rural communities in Ecuador. They have actually been working with one of our partners, Aves y Conservación in Ecuador, and they've identified the plants that the majority of hummingbirds in that area and other pollinators are attracted to. And working with the local municipality, we've created nurseries where they're growing those plants, and then the entire community is going out and planting the mountainside. So it's a massive reforestation, but reforestation in their native species that are the most beneficial to the pollinators. The top picture that you're seeing in the right hand there is in Nicaragua, working with one of the universities for agriculture, where they're teaching the local ranchers, the cattle producers, the ways in which they can do grasslands, bird-friendly habitat management. And then the lower slide actually is in Brazil, an important bird area there that we had created a few years ago. So, how does this relate to a local chapter? Bedford Audubon, my chapter, we started doing, putting the, what do you call it? Not the satellite, the geolocators on wood thrushes a number of years ago. And it was part of an international program to track and figure out where wood thrushes were going in the winter, what we could do to protect their habitat. And we actually discovered that several of the wood thrushes were wintering in an area of Nicaragua where I was doing work with ABC. And so we were able to link local chapter work to the International Life Cycle Conservation Plan. And just think about that. If we did that across all of our chapters, we could start setting up sister chapters with local communities in Honduras and Mexico and Belize and all the places where our birds are going for the winter. And we know that that actually is the bird that nests in Prune Sanctuary. That's the bird that nests in Croton Point. That's how much our science now can tell us. Same thing with shorebirds. The middle picture that you're looking at, F3, that American oyster catcher, I found that bird in Rowayton, Connecticut. I was doing part of our shorebird surveys in 2005. I think that photo's, no, actually it was banded in 2005. I found it a couple of years later. And then I was working in Nicaragua with some wonderful folks, Grupo Quetzalí, who are doing shorebird monitoring in the Gulf of Fonseca. And we discovered that F3, not only is it going to Nicaragua, but it's crossing and actually ending up on the Pacific. So here's this bird that's nesting in Rowayton, Connecticut, and it's traveling all the way down, cutting across somewhere in Honduras and wintering in the Pacific, in this wonderful Gulf of Fonseca. We can track this. We can actually create relationships so that we can go visit these sites. We can help the folks who are doing the conservation down there. They can come up and help us in different ways. And we can really build bonds between people and birds. And it's a great cross-section of people who you actually will be working with when you're doing this work. Of course, you've got other crazy North Americans like Scott Weidensaul and some of the folks from Westchester. You might recognize Lynette Say in there from Larchmont. Students, professors from local universities, the fellow in the lower picture, cacao farmers. They're all people who want to support their local environment. They want to protect their birds and their wildlife. And they're also trying to make a better place for their communities and feed their children. And they're doing it in a lot of the same ways that we do, having bird festivals, getting kids engaged. This is actually the University of Agriculture in Honduras. And these poor kids, the electricity, when I was supposed to speak to them about 3 p.m., and it was so hot, the electricity, they had a power outage. They waited till 7 o'clock at night to hear the talk, and they stayed till about 11 because they had so many questions. And then the next morning, we went out birding and to show them different migratory species. And then they did a bird festival for the local community that weekend. So there's incredible desire, inspiration, will in the young people across these countries to protect their environment. And they're doing everything that we try to do. They're getting on social media and television, talking about their festivals. They're talking to local farmers. They're out doing bird counts. And then what you're seeing, and I hope everybody is doing this, they're producing shade coffee so that the habitat isn't destroyed, and yet we can have that morning cup of Java. And so if you're somebody who likes doing Christmas bird counts, summer bird counts, I encourage you, see if you can come down to one of these countries and do the same thing with the people down there. Adopt an IBA, whether it's here or a corresponding one that the birds from our area are going to when they're wintering. Those who have more proficient skills, there's even opportunities to assist in training people, doing equipment exchanges. There's just limitless opportunities. In the end, the goal is to make each project self-sustaining. We always can use U.S. volunteers, but we're teaching data collection, we're helping design plots, and then we're passing all this knowledge on to people who will be there for the rest of their lives. We, as you can see in the upper right, we come down with tons and tons of equipment. The folks who are down there, they have sparse needs. Sometimes the group everybody doesn't even have their own binoculars. There's a lot of sharing. There's a lot of still writing on notepads with pencils, but there's the will to get it done. And if you can't come down as a volunteer, come down as a tourist. I know Sawmill does a lot of great trips. Let's visit the places where our birds winter and meet the people who are protecting our birds when they're down there. And in the meantime, buy everything that you can that's bird friendly, whether it's coffee, chocolate, there's organic cottons now, there's ibis rice, but unfortunately, I think the closest store that sells that is Bangkok. So we won't ask you to go that far. But I will ask you to spread the word because we need everybody working on this. And thank you.